Welcome to the Plant-Based Asia Summit, where we inspire a healthier and more sustainable Asia Pacific. I'm Luke, your co-host, and I'm excited to introduce you to our next speaker, Kuntal Joisher. Kuntal is the world's first vegan to scale Everest. His expeditions to some of the world's most dangerous mountains are fiercely driven by a profound personal mission as a vegan champion, dementia awareness advocate, and a humanitarian inspiration. Welcome, Kuntal, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Luke, and thanks for such a kind introduction. Really appreciate that, and really looking forward to our conversation today.
Indeed, Kuntal, you're quite an inspiring man, and of course, following you on social media for a while, and just looking at your amazing Instagram profile of all the beautiful, spectacular images that you've captured on the lens. I mean, I can't imagine what it would be like to be, right there and just experiencing the sight behind you, which is kind of like what your background looks like right now.
It
So,
is, by
so,
the way, a picture from the very top of Mount Everest. So yeah, that
and that's the
always
one
is
you
my
took, I would
background.
imagine.
I didn't take it, my Sherpa took it, but I took the liberty of, like asking him, can I use this photo everywhere? And he's like, go for it.
Just to kind of open up the conversation here, Kuntal, maybe you can just share with us a little bit about your journey and how you came. Was this always a part of your dream to become a mountaineer, to become a vegan mountaineer?
I will talk about the mountaineering piece first. And look, mountaineering was never part of my journey at all. I was a happy-go-lucky software engineer, that guy next door. And back in 2009, when I actually embarked on this journey, I was about 105, 110 kilos overweight. I live in plus 40 degrees Celsius throughout the year in Mumbai. And if you look at my community, I come from Kutchi community, which is a very small community here in Mumbai, and no one in my community has even climbed a small hill. Forget climbing to the top of Mount Everest. Most people in my community would even take lift or an elevator to go one floor. And here I was dreaming of climbing the tallest mountain on the planet. So, no, I didn't have any genetic disposition. I didn't have any genetic background or none of those things to be able to go and climb to the top of Everest. But I remember on that pivotal evening in October of 2010, we were at this place called the Pumori Base Camp. And I still remember that Pumori Base Camp is this place which is about a couple of hours away from Everest Base Camp. And Pumori Base Camp also offers you some of the best vantage point of Everest itself. And so we were in our dining tent, chit chatting, exchanging stories, and just having a good time. And this Sherpa guy outside started shouting my name. And in the mountains, if someone's shouting your name, it's almost always never good. So I quickly ran out and I'm like, what's happening? And the Sherpa guide said, turn around and look at Everest. And so I turn around and I look at Everest, and the last rays of sunset are falling on Everest. Every other mountain, and Everest is a massive range. These are mountains that you can't even fathom the amount of majesticness or the grandness of these mountains, and unless you see them up close up, and in person. But every other mountain around Everest was like in the colors of gray and blue. Everest in the middle was bang golden in color, as if someone had lit the entire snow on fire. And for me, when I saw Everest that way, I don't know, you are, uh, there was a spark inside me, or maybe that calling or whatever. I don't know how to kind of put it in words, but this spark inside me lit, and I kind of stood there and promised myself that I am going to come back one day and climb to the top of Mount Everest. And as much impossible as it sounds right now, standing here and looking at Everest, climbing to the top of Everest or reaching the top of the moon, both of them looked impossible to me at that point in my life. But at least one was something that I could aspire to do. And that's what kind of I promised myself. I'll come back one day. I'll get to the top of Everest. And I remember coming back at home and then kind of going over what it would take to climb Everest. One thing that I promised myself also was that I'm going to climb this mountain as a vegan or not going to climb it at all. And that kind of also, uh, a lot of people also ask me, why did you go vegan or why vegan in first place? And this had happened way earlier in my life, back in December of 2002, when, look, I've, I've been born and brought up in a vegetarian family. And so that mindset of compassion towards animals was always there. Uh, but I did not realize the amount of cruelty that still existed in dairy products, or that existed in something like a leather or a woolen clothing, or for that matter, something even like a Snickers bar that I was eating. And then you read the ingredients and then you see egg whites in them. We just never made the connection that egg whites would be coming from an exploited animal or from a slaughtered animal, because most of these companies have packaged these goods so nicely and put it up on a shelf of like a grocery store, where you are desensitized to a point where you can't make the connection that that thing that you are eating or the thing that you are wearing is, coming from a dead animal or a slaughtered animal or a exploited animal. There's just no connection there. And so for a couple of years I was living in the US. I was doing my master's degree. I was living independently. That was also the time I was exposed to a lot of ideas, a lot of concepts that were something that I was not exposed to when I was living here in Mumbai. And one of my roommates exposed me to this concept of that there is a lot of cruelty in the dairy industry and the leather industry and the egg industry. And I started doing my research. And as much as people are turned off by the cruelty videos that they see, I actually went vegan because of those cruelty videos. I saw those cruelty videos and I connected the dots that there's really no difference between a piece of meat and a glass of milk or a block of cheese, or for that matter, the leather belt that I was, wearing and flashing everywhere. There's no difference. Everything at the end of the day came from abused and slaughtered animals. And so if I would not do one, then why was I doing others? So there was this dilemma that I had to reconcile. And as soon as I started doing my research, I quickly realized that there were two things that I could control: what I ate and what I wore, or what I put on my body in some sense, including like my soap or including my toothpaste, all of those things. And look, all of us lead in some sense a very privileged life. If you're here on a Zoom call talking to each other, definitely leading a privileged life in some sense. So, as a privileged person, those are definitely things I could control. I had the money, I had that opportunity, I had the context where I could change the food I was eating and change the clothing I was wearing and contribute lesser towards that animal cruelty. And it was a no brainer decision for me back in 2002. And I kind of, tell everyone that the only regret I have is, why didn't I go vegan sooner? Like, why wasn't I exposed this concept sooner? So that's kind of, a bit of background about why I decided to climb Everest, or why I was a vegan, and why I decided to do that together. Because to me, uh, veganism has been an ethical choice, a choice that I made for the animals, or standing up for the animals. And everything else is just incidental in my life: my clothing choices, my food choices, and all of those things. So when I decided to climb Everest, it was not going to be like, hey, you know what, Everest can't be climbed without eating meat or without eating dairy or those things. So maybe I'm going to keep my veganism on the side for a while, climb Everest, and then become a vegan. That's not how it was going to work for me. It was just going to be very simple: Everest as a vegan, or no Everest. That's it. There's no other way here.
Resonate with what you shared, because for me it was an animal cruelty documentary that flipped me overnight. And once you see something, you can't really unsee it anymore. And once you actually make that connection deep within, it becomes a fuel, it becomes a drive for you to live a different life. to spread a different message, because you are, as they say, part of the change. More so than ever before, this is coming to the forefront. Hence our conversation today, and this summit, and the amazing work that you're doing, and many people advocating this message. So when you actually made the switch to veganism, or even just moving to wanting to climb Everest on a plant-based diet, did you ever at any point doubt yourself? Where, let's say, if I remember when I first went vegan overnight, I after a few months was just like, oh, I was in fitness. I there were doubts, but I had a strong why. So for you, did you ever doubt yourself, throughout your kind of plant-based journey, vegan journey, and then moving towards even wanting to climb Everest? Were there any points? Do share.
Think a lot of these doubts were in the beginning, when I decided that I wanted to climb Everest, and I kind of started writing to a lot of adventure agencies that, hey, look, I want to climb Everest and I want to do it as a vegan. Would you be able to support my plant-based diet on these expeditions? And it was such a shocker because in 2009, 2010, people just didn't know what plant-based diet even meant. So I was writing to these agencies, these Western agencies based in the United States and Europe, and they would write back to me saying, "Can you explain us what a plant-based diet means?" And I'm like, wow, like this is such a shocker. Today, if you tell someone that I'm a vegan or I need plant-based diet, they- even the smallest restaurant here in Mumbai, where veganism is not even so big, people would know what veganism is because it's such a exponential trend across the world today. But back in 2010, people just didn't know any of this stuff. So I would write to them and they would be like, I would explain to them, I don't eat eggs, I don't eat any dairy products, I don't eat any meat. And I would just go through the entire list. I don't wear any down feathers jackets, or I don't use any leather, I don't use any wool. And they would just come back to me and say, but then how are you going to train for Everest? You need meat to train for Everest. You need to eat eggs, you need to eat cheese, you need to eat dairy, and you need to wear down, you need to wear leather. And I'm like, wow, in my mind, anytime someone told me that you need to eat meat, I'm like, but why would you need to eat meat? Sure, I can understand if you came back to me and said you need to eat protein, or you need to eat, optimum amount of protein for whatever your goal is. Yeah, sure, I can, kind of think, okay, that makes sense. Or is someone coming back to me and saying you need some essential fats in your diet, or someone coming back to me and saying that you need to, fuel optimally, or those things, that I can understand. As an engineer, while I'm not claiming to be a nutrition expert or something, but I know the basics. I knew the basics always. So when these people came back to me and saying these things, I'm like, that it was a bit of, kind of, I was taken aback. And I even remember back then Googling climbing Everest as a vegan. It had never happened to me that Google comes back with zero results. And like even Google didn't have any answers because no one had done it. So there was no precedent in some sense, which is why a lot of these agencies were kind of pushing back on me. But I'm like, look, I'm going to do it, irrespective of what you guys think anyway. And I remember going and climbing my first mountain and getting to the top of this mountain. It was a 20,000 feet mountain in July of 2011. And believe me, that was my first mountain, first 20,000 feet mountain of my life. And if I have to write down top 100 challenges of that I faced on that mountain, a plant based diet would not even be the 101st challenge on that. And from that point onwards, I knew that plant based diet is not going to be the challenge. The challenge is going to be convincing the people that it works, not the diet itself. The diet, if a guy like me with minimal training for a year could be the best climber among some of the more experienced climbers, so I knew diet was not the problem. Diet is, as long as I'm being, well researched, well planned, and I'm, ensuring that I'm getting all the macro and micronutrients right, or at least, doing some job at it, like a reasonable balanced diet, that's not a problem. The important things are focusing on my training and focusing on my readiness and those kind of things. And a diet was not the problem. So that's kind of, how my journey started. And I can tell you from the last 11 years of my journey, plant-based diet has been the least of my worries. uh, not even on the top 1,000 worries list of my life. So in that sense, plant-based diet not a challenge at all. Pretty normal. Anyone who's out there in the fitness world or climbing mountains or running races or doing anything, plant-based diet not a challenge from a whatsoever angle.
Definitely, and it almost becomes your fuel, the optimal fuel on so many levels, on a, of course, nutritional level, physical level, and of course spiritual level as well. So I guess challenge is key. You mentioned the word challenge and plant-based diet being the least of your challenges. So maybe you can, firstly, two questions here. The first question is, how did you kind of fuel?
So from a fueling standpoint, as soon as I realized that mountaineering at the end of the day is a very long endurance driven activity, uh, quickly just a very simple Google search pointed me to that most people who are in the endurance world use carbohydrates as fuel. And so it was like, carbohydrates come from plant world anyway, they don't come from animal world anyway. So if anyone wants to do any activity related to endurance, at least from a fueling perspective, carbohydrates are your best friends. Sure, now what kind of carbohydrates you choose, those can be very specific to what specific activities you are doing. But in my case, mountaineering is such a slow and a game of patience and such a longer game. It's not like my event is going to get over in 1 day or in 2 days. It's going to last for 60 days. So it's not like I have to be so specific about the carbohydrate sources I choose. But on the other hand, it just needs to be a balanced diet where I am just constantly priming my glycogen stores all the time for that final few days, which are the hardest in my climb. So, again, not a very difficult thing. Everything from whole grains to starchy vegetables to lentils, all of these things are amazing sources of carbohydrates and amazing sources to kind of replenish your glycogen stores also very easily. While back then, I didn't realize that I was on a calorie surplus all the time and consuming a significant amount of carbohydrates, where my muscle glycogen was always primed, always primed. I only understand a lot of these things now in the hindsight as I learn more about nutrition. But back then it was just so easy. I didn't even think. I just ate. I ate, I trained, I recovered, and I didn't have to overthink any of these things. I was always great on the mountains. I was always fast and amazing on the mountains. And I just would look at other climbers and I would like, why are you eating so much meat? Why are you eating so much eggs? And you're in the mountains. Wouldn't you just be eating what people in the mountains eat? And every time I look at what a Sherpa guide eats, he's eating a massive portion size of rice, lentils. And if you have ever seen a Sherpa guide eat potatoes, they would literally be just sitting with a bucket, like a bucket in which, I can have my bath. That amount of potatoes they are eating. And yes, I'm not claiming that they don't eat meat. They eat meat, but it is a small portion size on the side. So if you look at the diet, it's like 85% carbohydrates and then balance whatever they're, eating on the side. So I'm like, wouldn't you just eat what these amazing mountaineers of the world are eating? And I kind of stuck to that diet while, replacing whatever those sources of, like, if they are eating meat, then I was just eating, vegan protein on the side. It's not difficult to get vegan protein from lentils if you are eating lot of lentils, right? If I'm on a 4,500 calorie diet and if I'm eating enough lentils, I'll easily hit my protein needs of the day without even thinking about it. So I kind of thought, in the scheme of mountaineering, people were overthinking too much about protein and fats, whereas they were always under thinking about carbohydrates, which should have been their focus point in the mountaineering world. And believe me, I think as I said, I didn't really have to put in too much effort in my food piece because I plant-based world is the way to go if you want to become a solid mountaineer. And now, I, look, I'm going to speak from anecdotal evidence point of view, at least from taking my experience and that. But even today, if you look across the endurance world, may it be ultra runners, may it be any kind of endurance athletes, majority of them fuel themselves using plant-based foods. So it's a no brainer in my sense that plant based foods needs to make up a significant chunk of your diet. And if you're so worried about your protein, plant based world has many lean protein options as well, so you can always include those to kind of hit your protein needs and your recovery needs and those kind of things if that's what you want. So a, a well balanced, a well planned plant based diet is a very good choice in my opinion. If you want to become a mountaineer, or conversely on the other side you want to become a bodybuilder, I think it works for both cases.
Agreed, agreed, definitely. And you brought up two things there that I picked up. I mean, carbohydrates are the primary and the optimal fuel source for the body to function, whether it's your brain, whether it's your muscle cells. On top of that, you also mentioned that you're gonna get sufficient protein. If you're training a lot harder, your caloric needs are gonna increase significantly, and by hitting those caloric goals, you are automatically going to hit your protein goals.
Right.
So I think that's something that we don't really need to think so much about, and there's almost an overemphasis on protein. So I want to now go into, to a certain degree, you mentioned the last bit of the trek or the quest, the expedition were the toughest. So where that's concerned, maybe you could just kind of share whether there were any near-death experiences, any disasters that happened along the way, and how did you overcome them?
I made 3 or 4 attempts at climbing Everest, and I was successful on 2 of my attempts. But my first 2 attempts at climbing Everest were not as successful. In 2014, I made my first attempt, and 17 Sherpa guides unfortunately died in that attempt, and we had to cancel our expeditions and come home. I'm not going to get into the details of what happened. Uh, and I decided, you know what, I'm going to train harder, and I'm going to go back again in 2015 and climb this mountain. So I went back in 2015, and this time around the climb was reasonably progressing until the largest earthquake to hit Nepal in about 100 years happened, a 7.9 magnitude earthquake. And that caused, or that induced, a massive avalanche that swept through entire base camp of Everest. And I remember being at the base camp of Everest at that point, and I remember coming face to face with that avalanche, left of the sky to right of the sky. The entire sky was just filled with snow and ice, as if it was this massive tsunami of snow and ice in front of me. Like tsunami would potentially just be 10, 11 meters, but this had filled the entire sky. There was nowhere to run. Like I can't run on left, I can't run on right, I can't run anywhere. There's nowhere to escape the whole thing. And I remember in that moment, like I had always thought, what would happen when I would be faced with death? And I was always like, maybe I would be shit scared, or maybe I would just, not be able to. I don't know what would happen. And it was so anticlimactic that when I was actually faced with death, instead of being scared of death, I was actually just sad that I was going to die, that I wanted to live, that I wanted to. There were so many things I wanted to do in life, but I was faced with a certain death, and I was standing, and I'd said my prayers. I was ready to die, and then I remember the avalanche hit us, and for the next 10 seconds, I was like, I'm going to maybe buried in about 2 3 feet of snow. That 2 3 feet of snow will become concrete in maybe the next 20 to 25 minutes. I will never be able to dig out of it, and I will die. I will die a very slow and a painful death. And then 10 seconds later, I look at my body and I'm like, that's just 2 inches of snow. That's not 2 feet of snow. But then I just couldn't breathe in that. Whatever had happened, it had changed the environment, and I was trying to suck in a lot of air, and like just ice particles coming in my lung. There's just no air, as if it's like we are in some vacuum or something. And like I'm sucking air again, thinking that I'm panicking, and which is why I'm hyperventilating. It's not I'm hyperventilating. I'm like really calm now, given that I have escaped the avalanche. And the guy next to me, a German mountaineer, he opened his jacket and he said, Kuntal, you can come inside my jacket and breathe. So right away, instinctively, my face went inside his jacket, and I'm like, wow, it's as if a newborn baby like taking its first breath, like all that choking in my lungs had stopped, and I'm like, whoa. And I think that's continued for the next 2.5 minutes, and that's how kind of I survived the avalanche. but 21 people dead, 100 people injured at the base camp, people grew dying in gruesome fashion, getting hit by massive rocks on their faces, and dead bodies everywhere, debris everywhere. It was like a war zone kind of a feeling at the base camp. And then once we heard that 10,000 people dead in Kathmandu, and five, like a half a million people homeless, it was, second time we couldn't make it. And in my mind, it was not, it was a no brainer. We had to go home. It didn't make sense when an earthquake is happening that we are climbing a mountain. So we cancel our expeditions. We came home. And to me, in some sense, I had escaped a near death, which also meant that I had a second chance at life. And since that day, I have considered every moment that I have lived to be just a bonus, because I had said my prayers. So I was ready to die actually. So to have a second chance at life was huge for me. And I promised myself I'm going to go back next year and try again. This is the biggest dream of my life and I'm going to do it. And so next year I went back again. 2016 was a relatively uneventful year. And I use the word relatively because mountaineering cannot be safe, mountaineering cannot be uneventful, but it's all relative in that sense. So luckily we went through almost majority of the climb, and I still remember May 18th, about 9:30 in the night, my Sherpa guide Mingma Tenji Sherpa and I, both of us came out of our tents. This was at 26,000 feet, and I think it was about minus 35 degrees Celsius, and really calm weather in that sense. So not a lot of wind, and we started our journey to the very top of Mount Everest, and we climbed for about 12 hours through the night in dark, and finally at 9:15 the next morning, I was like standing about 5 minutes away from the summit of Everest. And I remember my Sherpa guide standing on the top and waving at me that come. And I think like for the first time, I realized that I have completed the biggest dream of my life. And it was such a it was such a river of emotions, like starting with a very emotion that I did not think that I would even get at the top of Mount Everest, but an emotion that, thank God, this is done. It's check marked. It is out of my life. And I'm like, why am I even thinking like this? But maybe it had taken so much time to get to the top that I'm like, this is done. This is out of my life now. And then I think once that emotion kind of went away, it was just this emotion of joy and exhilaration. And I think the biggest emotion that morning was an emotion of gratitude towards the mountain, that it allowed me to stand on the top, or that emotion of gratitude towards my wife or my mother for being such steadfast support throughout the last 6 years of sacrifices that they made, or just reaching the top and hugging my Sherpa tightly and expressing my gratitude to him that, thank you, without you I was never going to make it to the top of Everest. So it was just immense gratitude at the top, that I was there and that I had a chance to be there. So yeah, and I had a vegan flag with me. So planting that vegan flag on the top of Mount Everest and kind of telling, kind of my way of contributing back to the cause that changed my life, some like in December of 2002. So just a lot of that, but also to kind of prove to the world that if a person like me, 110 kilo unhealthy, near obese software engineer living in plus 40 degrees Celsius, if that guy can turn around his life, go on a journey of consistency and discipline, build that top of the world body and mind on a vegan diet, if a person like me can do it, then every single human being on this planet can achieve the biggest dreams of their life on a vegan diet without having any animals suffer or die for their dreams. That was, kind of the thing that I wanted to share with everyone, because if I can do it, I'm pretty sure every human on this planet can do it. Like if I can be standing on top of Everest, one of the most hostile places on the planet, I don't want to kind of sound negative here, or like like criticize people, but like no one has an excuse not to do this. So that was kind of, my mindset, and I wanted to show that. And that's why I took the vegan flag. I get criticized a lot because I didn't take an India flag. And I'm like, am I not an Indian? I am an Indian. I represent India myself. But then I wanted to talk about veganism. So I took the vegan flag and I like kind of put it on top of Everest and like tell the world, everyone can do this.
I love that, Kuntal. I can almost feel the emotion and feel the exhilaration when you're on top. And after years and years, and of course, as you mentioned, sacrifice to your family that have made to kind of help you realize this dream, because it's never a one-man show. It's of course with your help, with your Sherpa, but it still takes a certain amount of drive to be able to say, to keep showing up. So with that in mind, in summary, and I wish we could talk a lot longer, because I reckon this conversation can go for at least 2 to 3 hours. Um, but just as a takeaway, lasting piece for people watching and listening out there, and you brought up about seeing the mountain glow, and that was that spark, that was your calling. So many people get insights and get inspiration here and there, and of course around this past couple of years it has been a little bit down, and many people have lost loved ones, lost their incomes and things like that. So it's been challenging. So what can you say to people who are challenged, who maybe have a little bit of spark left in there, to actually take action and move towards the direction that they want to go, and to be at top of their metaphorical mountain?
I'm going to share two things. One from the pandemic perspective. A lot of people look at me and say, hey, you have insane levels of willpower to a point that you can do whatever you want. And yes, maybe, I maybe genetically I'm gifted with a little more willpower than others. But a lot of this willpower has also been a lot of hard work over a period of years. And I do think everyone can build this willpower, but I'm not going to sit here and say, exert willpower, you need to show up. And I'm not going to say any of those kind of things. Uh, Even someone like me had a hard time through this pandemic, staying focused, staying positive, and just showing up day in, day out and putting in the work, or following my dreams or following my passions. Even someone like me with this much level of willpower, I had to work very, very hard through this, uh, because in my mind, I truly value the second chance that I got in 2015. If for me, the life is my entire life is bonus now. And I am always in that attitude that every moment wasted is kind of an insult to life itself, an insult to the second chance that I got back in 2015. Not many people get second chance at life, and I got a second chance at life itself. I can't be wasting it away. I'm completely saying it from my perspective. Many people are in different scenarios and different contexts and different situations, so I can't speak for them, but I can say from my experience what I did. And in terms of that spark, when I found my Everest, I will not say that until then my life was not great. My life was pretty good. I was, enjoying my life, and everything was fine. But when I found my Everest, uh, I found that passion and drive and focus to go on a journey to relentlessly pursue that Everest. And I do think that when you find your Everest, or when you find that thing or that spark in your life, I would like to think that you would find the same focus and passion and drive to go on that journey. I think the important thing is, at least from my hindsight, what I can speak is to overcome the hesitation and actually show up the very first time and do the work, and like just show up, like just show up the first time. Sure, having a dream, hey, I'm going to climb Everest is great, but then translating that to showing up the first time and actually doing something about that dream, I think that just kickstarting the journey, that for me was a game changer. Because once I kickstarted the journey, I knew that that is it, this is all I needed. I'm now on track. I'm going to get to the top of Everest. It's not a question of how, it's now just a question of when.
I really resonate with that. And what I heard you say as well was at least the two takeaway points. Find your Everest, I would say, because everybody has their own Everest, their own mountain to climb. whether it's, finances, whether it's serving the family, whether it's having a quest like yours, but finding something that is means something to you, and allows for you to be pulled in that direction. But more importantly, just make a decision to just show up. It doesn't mean that you need to show up 100%. Just do set micro goals, 1,000 feet at a time. Just slowly climb your way up, and eventually you get to 20,000 feet. With that in mind, I want to say thank you very, very much, Kontol. I wish we had more time. I really appreciate your inspiration, and I no doubt the audience will as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Luke. Really had a good time.